Hello and welcome everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Abraham Ferrer and I'm a staff member at Visual Communications, the nation's premier Asian Pacific American Media Arts Center. We are currently in the middle of our golden year anniversary, the 50th anniversary. I cannot believe that that we have been around for so long, but I am so glad that that you're able to join us on this Monday afternoon as we chat with some very special guests who who I have known for quite a while. And what we'll be doing today is that we will be talking about photos, and specifically we're going to be talking about just some of the photographs that are contained within one of Visual Communications's primary production resources here, the Asian Pacific American Photographic Archive. Now, for people who have been, checking out Visual Communications activities this year through such events such as the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival, you will know that that we are known as a media arts center that supports filmmakers and media artists. But one of the things that people may not necessarily know about is that since the beginning of this organization's existence, we have steadfastly documented the Asian American movement and later on the Asian Pacific American movement through a still photography practice. And as part of a way of recognizing that heritage, some of our founders had put together a unique photographic exhibit last year called At First Light, the Dawning of Asian Pacific America, that ran last year at the Japanese American National Museum. We are very happy to bring back some of the images that were contained in photo documentaries that were produced by some of our founders, and are part of this special program, the stories behind the picture. And at this point, let me go ahead and welcome our guests here. First of all, we have Eddie Wong, who is a co-founder of Visual Communications, and he was one of the folks who was involved in organizing the At First Light exhibit, and one of the primary producers of the video documentaries that make up the stories from the Visual Communications archive. With us today is Mike Murase, Mike, who works down the street from us at the Little Tokyo Service Center, but who has been involved in both art and activism for a very long time. And he'll be talking a little bit about that with Eddie and some of the activities that that he's doing currently. With us also is Mary Uyematsu, who was also involved in a lot of movement activities, but was also involved with both a still and motion picture practice. And she has continued that, and she has a couple of really exciting projects that we're going to talk a little bit about later. And then finally, we're very happy to have with us Andrea Yamazaki, who I had met many years ago when she was working with what was then the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, and is now doing some very important activities in nurturing today's youth down in Orange County. So Eddie, Mike, Mary, and Andrea, welcome everybody for joining us this afternoon. What I want to go ahead and do is that I want to go ahead and turn it over to Eddie for a few minutes. And since you and another one of the founders, Dwayne Kubo, in tandem with Robert Nakamura, had a big part in putting together, the video documentaries and what have you. I wonder if you can explain a little bit about how that idea, came up, and the idea for interviewing these three individuals, as well as like several dozen others, throughout the course of 2.5, 3 years.
Oh, hi. Hey, everybody. Good to be with you. I'm really sorry Dwayne's not on this Zoom. he says he doesn't like to do Zoom. I don't blame him, but dang, he's a big part of this. I mean, he and I decided to like look at the entire work of the early period of BC, and I would focus on the still photographs, and he would focus on all the the moving images, video, film, and there's a lot of stuff that never made it into films. And he actually worked with Walt Louis and others, John Isaki, and to really put together some of those clips. And if you go to the link that Abe provided in the email about VC Connects, you'll see that the Philip Veracruz interview, and pieces that are just like priceless, that some of it made it into the project, some didn't. But basically, I think our goal was to make sure that before we forget everything, that we actually, put together something for the next generations that talk about what these events were that we photographed and what was the meaning of these events. And that's why I got involved with this project. I mean, there's some iconic things like the very first Asian Americans for Peace rally in Little Tokyo, probably the first anti-war rally ever in Little Tokyo that Mike Murase and many others were part of, or the Van Troy Brigade, which came like 2 years later, that Mary was part of. We just had to tell those stories, and that's how the whole project started, telling stories about the past and what it means for today.
Great, great. So let's go ahead and have you start off in conversation with our first guest, Mike Murase. Again, we mentioned that Mike, is currently involved with the UCLA. Oh, well, actually, the Little Tokyo Service Center. I'm getting all mixed up, but Eddie, if you guys can talk a little bit about how you guys, got Mike involved in this project, and what was the significance of his contributions to not only the images in the archive, but also the Asian American movement more in general?
Well, I first met Mike at UCLA when we were both students, and along with Mary, we were all part of UCLA at the same time in the late 60s. And this is even before Ghidra started. And then we worked together at Ghidra. And, at the time, Mike was, and maybe he still is, a photographer and, a storyteller in his own right. And so, and then for a hot second, he was actually in film school with us. But he was such a big part of organizing that first rally in Little Tokyo. And then, Alan Ohashi and Bob Nakamura did extensive coverage of that event. And so with all of that material, I wanted to contextualize it. And I thought there's nobody better to talk about how it got organized, how that event got organized than Mike. And that's, it was very easy to get him on board to do it. And we went straight into it.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that January 17th, 1970 rally. And what's going to be happening is that while that's happening, we're going to go ahead and and show a few stills that were made by one of VC's co-founders, Robert Nakamura, of that day. Whatnot. If you can share some of your thoughts and memories around that.
Okay, so by the time this march and rally took place in Little Tokyo in January of 1970, that was 50 years ago, many of us had become involved in actually two large influences and movements. One had to do with the civil rights, Black liberation movement, and ethnic identity. And the other had to do with the international situation, and at that time highlighted by the Vietnam War. And by the time of this demonstration, there had been citywide demonstrations taking place at various places and throughout the country. But I think as Asian Americans, one of the things that we recognized was that even within a progressive movement, within an anti-war movement that is led by sort of the mainstream white activists, there was a kind of a blind spot about the lives of Asian Americans and the experience of Asians and Asian Americans. And I think, typical of that was that people would talk often about the body count of American soldiers being killed, but hardly a mention of the millions of Vietnamese Asian people being, and many of them civilians, women, children, being killed in that war. And and I think even the Asian American uh, men who signed up to for the U.S. Military, they were treated with some hostility and used as sort of like examples of this is what a good looks like. So there, there's insensitivity and racism in the broader movement. So we decided to try to, voice our own concerns in addition to being opposed to U.S. imperialism, being opposed to war in general, but to talk about the racism and the racist aspects of the war. And so that's why a group of people came together. And I would say that you saw in the earlier images that it was a very broad, intergenerational cross section of the Asian American community who came out, and I think the sentiment against the war in Vietnam had grown to a certain point where it was not just a matter of a handful of activists promoting this, but I think the community at large was, very opposed to the war. And the last thing I'd like to add on this is that even though, as Eddie mentioned, this might have been the first anti-war movement against the Vietnam War. Certainly that all of us recognize, and I think all the people in the audience know that, the history and the tradition of struggle in the Asian American communities go way, way back. And there have been, for whatever, oppression or unfairness that took place. I think there was a tradition of struggle against that. So I don't want to paint the picture that the Asian American movement in the 1970s was the sort of the first thing to ever happen like that. But I think for the three of us and the thousands of young people that got involved in that period, it is a very significant part of um, consciousness raising and politicization of young Asian Americans at that time.
Mhm. Now, as you're looking at these, at these images, flashing up on screen and what have you, I kind of wonder, if you, think about the people that you were participating with. Granted, many of them, are continuing to do some great work today, and you've collaborated with them over the years and stuff. Others, have disappeared, and I think that that's kind of like a natural progression and stuff, because it's like people get older, and what have you. They go on to other things and what have you. But in looking, at this day and the way that it was captured, and the way that you had captured the movement through your own work with publications such as Gija, and the images that you had accrued over time, for that publication and others and stuff. I'm wondering what kind of impression that you come away with, while reconsidering all these images that that have been made by different folks around that time.
Yeah, I guess first I would say that that period of my life was very important to me, and felt like I was developing and learning new things and meeting a lot of different people that I would have never met. So on a personal level, I look back on that period as not only a period of struggle and growth, but of a lot of fun and making a lot of friends, and something that shaped my life for a long time. And I think on the point about sort of the ups and downs of Asian American movement or any kind of movement, the people come together at certain points and then they disperse. But I think with the advent of social media, I've been able to connect with people that I hadn't seen for many, many years. And I think in terms of how people think about that period, but also about society in general as things continue, that I think the lessons that all of us shared at that time of like progressive ideas that we learned. I learned that a lot of people, whether they're active or not, they have very similar sentiments that they retain. So I think it's not as robust and as vibrant as in the 60s and 70s, but I think more recently, I guess especially this year with all the things that have gone on, I think a lot of people have connected or reconnected, and we're talking about back in the 60s, BLM was Black Liberation Movement. Now it's Black Lives Matter, but we're still talking about the BLM and the need to be in solidarity with them, and all the other things that are going on, the electoral arena and everything. I mean, I think there's no question that all of this, the struggle and the consciousness has to continue. So,
Great. Well, thank you so very much, Mike. If you hold, that thought, I wanted to get some, more thoughts from you later. But Eddie, why don't we go ahead and introduce our, next, guest here, Mary.
Oh, wow! I think she's more than capable of introducing herself.
and stuff. All right, well, let's go ahead and do that. So, so Mary, why don't we go ahead and talk about some of the things that you've been doing. And I know that the next set of images that we're going to be showing, basically are images from a big march event that you were involved in, and I think that we have like this this benefit of seeing the same event from images that you had made in your own practice as a photographer. So if I can have you talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, the event, you're talking about the Van Tri Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade?
Yeah.
In particular, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the video that I was in on this. That event was so emotionally impactful for me that at a certain point, I stopped taking photographs. It was so exciting. I just really got caught up in the moment. And so as soon as the people from the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade lit the Japanese military flag on fire, I was just like in awe, right? And then, at the same moment, all this confetti came down from high up from the bank building, and then there was people on top of the building who were agitating and talking about, ending the war in Vietnam, and also Japan as the junior partner of the U.S. imperialists, their part in the whole thing, right? Japan was a major jumping off point for U.S. troops going to Vietnam, especially in Okinawa, which is, full of military bases there. So it was probably, for me, for the LA movement, one of the most exciting and most important events that stays fresh in my memory.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about these images that are coming up on screen here now. Mike and Eddie, as well as yourself, will probably know, but if you can tell us a little bit about the composition of many of the people that are in, these set of photos, because, it's my understanding that quite a few of them were still in high school, at that time. Some people were in college, but I kind of think that, just the specter of a group of, of young folks, 300 or more strong, just basically, hijacking the Nisei Week Grand Parade. I think that is amazing, and over the course of, of looking and looking and re-looking at a dozen rolls of film that were made by visual communications photographers from different angles. Really, I think that I agree with you. This is like a watershed event, and if I could tell, if I can have you talk a little bit about, the dynamic, here, which I found very, very, intriguing. And the more I, heard the stories about, Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade and the sister organization, the Tai Bin, and what have you, uh, I just think that, this is like a very, very memorable, moment in history. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think if you look at the video, we have Scott Nakatani talking about the organizing. He was a high school student, and
Mhm.
I didn't know any of this really until we did the video. And they've been organizing and doing teach-ins at I think LA High and Dorsey High,
Mhm.
and working with younger people from Yellow Brotherhood and Asian Sisters. And so there was a whole lead up of about a year before this thing happened. Where there was a walkout at one of the high school campuses that they organized in protest of RLTC.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of education and organizing work going on prior to the actual event. And
Oh,
then, as you notice, everyone was wearing white T-shirts and jeans. It was sort of like those are all very purposeful things. They wanted to have, kind of a uniform look, and also in case they had to disperse, people couldn't exactly figure out who was who. So they had a lot of really great thinking went into this thing. But I think that they were as surprised as everybody was on the reaction. I mean, both good and bad. It was simply stunning, I think. I mean, I wasn't even there that day, but the VC had like 4 or 5 people shooting photographs, and nothing planned, on our part. For a lot of the stuff that we shot, it was like, go for it. Whoever wants to shoot, shoot. And, it's in like the hundreds of images that were shot that day that we
mhm.
kind of culled together images for the video. And hopefully it captures kind of the spirit of the moment.
Mhm. Um, if you guys can talk a little bit about, what's become of some of the people that, are, in the photos and, at the event and, what have you, because, through the initiatives of some of the folks who were in college, like, um, I think it was Scott Nagatani and Jimmy Kochiyama and a few other folks and what have you. They, basically
Eddie,
the summer was, who was it?
Eddie Kochiyama.
Eddie, so basically, the whole, idea was like go in there and just basically like, activism 101 for high school folks, and what have you. And, like I'm just curious to find out, like if any of these young folks, you know, stuck around, the movement, or what has happened, or do we see any of them around still?
Scott Nagatani.
Well, he's one.
Still see him around.
hmm And stuff. Yeah, I think that what's really amazing, like about this as we go ahead and take a look at like another picture. This is like Little Tokyo looking towards downtown, and this is basically like world famous First Street looking like west towards um,
East.
east, towards Boyle Heights and what have you. Mary, if you can talk a little bit about you know the creative practice that you were pursuing at that time, and how your sense of activism informed your own artistic practice.
Well, at the time, I was in the ethnocommunications program at UCLA, which Mike and Eddie and Dwayne were all part of, but most of them had graduated out by the time I got in. So I was in this film program,
Mm-hmm.
and I was making a film on, I wanted mainly to focus and capture the change of Asian American women from our stereotype as being this quiet, docile, obedient women into these active fighters for the revolution.
Mhm.
And so that was pretty much my focus in most of the photographs I was taking at the time. And so I would just basically go to a lot of different events. I mean, pretty much the same as the VC, where just spontaneously you hear about an event going on, and if you can do it, you just go down there and you just shoot, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started working on my book that I actually researched back into the political content of a lot of these events, right? Because at the time it was just like, you're caught up in the moment, and then when you're shooting, you don't, you're focusing on images, capturing images of people and this and that, but you're not always soaking in the political content that's being put out there by, the political leaders of the time.
Mhm.
And so, there's this kind of a disjuncture happening. And so I was able to kind of bridge that gap, putting out this book just this year.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's perfectly, that's great. And I think that your book, definitely went a long way in terms of, of broadening the perspective, to include, like a very, women-centric, viewpoint of the movement and stuff. I've said, a lot, before, that one of the things one of the very few things that I feel is lamentable about visual communications is that, most of the folks, in the very, very early days who were, making photographs were like guys, and eventually that started broadening out, because like Pat Lau Miller was making photos, Betty Chen was, and then like the second wave of VCers, such as Janice Tanaka, Linda Mabalit, and those folks, were, came in, with the, shooting and what have you. But I think that in the very, very early days, I thought that was like a very, unique viewpoint, and I think a very necessary viewpoint to, to have, so like I definitely thank you for that. Eddie, let me ask you, just turning, gears for just a hot second. How did you and Andrea, meet up, and what inspired you to, to look beyond Little Tokyo into Chinatown and some of the, goings on that were happening there?
Well, I was like one of the few Chinese Americans in VC, and so I felt like, hey, I better go photograph my community. And I grew up in LA Chinatown. I mean, I was born in Chinatown at French Hospital, and I'd go there every weekend with my dad. And even though we lived in Hollywood and had a little laundry there, so I kind of like been around the community a while. And it was just like Bob said, go out and shoot. I mean, the only way you're going to learn. And by the way, I was a terrible photographer at the beginning, just horrible. I mean, I could barely focus the camera. And some might say I still have that problem. But it was like you learn by doing it. You make the road by walking. So we just covered everyday life, and Chungking Road, which is very visual. I mean, you had sweatshop stores, the Chinese community, Chinese Youth Council, Teen Post was all there, and I was part of that. And so there was a lot of stuff going on that was this rich material. And I think people seem to tolerate us. I don't speak Cantonese, I speak Toisan, and at barely beyond a baby talk level. And so, it was like, I was kind of an outsider, but, at the same time, I knew a little bit what was going on. And with Andrea, I think that famous shot of her standing in the doorway, Dwayne took that photo. And so we've been shooting a lot of times around them. And I think it was Andrea who contacted VC about wanting a copy of that photo and the other photo, especially of her siblings. And is that what happened, Andrea? I forgot now. I mean,
yes, that's exactly what happened. I don't know if you want me to get started, but
sure, go ahead.
okay. Well, hi everyone. I'm Andrea Ling Yamasaki. Ling is my maiden name, and I was born in Chinatown, just like Eddie. And first of all, I want to say thank you for having me here today. After hearing Mike's and Mary's story, I almost wish I was born 10 years earlier so I could be in the trenches with them. And I'm so in awe of the work that they've done, and it helped pave the way for the API community and immigrant voices for many generations to come. So my hat's off to you, because it's so important. So thank you. Um, you know, it's funny because someone sent me a video of life in Chinatown, and just going through it, I'm like, hey, that's me on that video, and there's my cousin, and there's my family. There's, so someone documented our life in Chinatown, and so it was amazing to see. It was even more amazing because it captured some images of my little brother, who actually has succumbed to cancer, and so I really wanted those pictures. So I reached out to BC. Actually, I reached out to Eddie. I think it was on Vimeo, and I said, hey, can I get copies of these pictures somehow? So Eddie and I met, and I was telling him how, life was in Chinatown for me, and how it impacted me in a way that gave me a different perspective. Um, when the pictures were taken, I would think I was 7 or 8 years old. So I was didn't even know that they existed. And so that was amazing to see. My grandparents immigrated to America back in the 20s, but they lived in Mississippi for 30 years prior to moving to Chinatown. And I was born in Chinatown, like Eddie, like I said, and I lived in apartments just outside of Chungking Road, um, with all my cousins. And so you see in these pictures, my brother's on the right side, my other brother, and my two cousins. And so we used to hang out in the parking lots, because that was our parking lot. We used to help our grandparents and parents work the parking lots a little bit, but it was more of our playground more than anything. I felt like we had a really rich life. I didn't feel like we didn't have, of course, now when I look back, we were scrappy, but we were happy, and we played and we played, and we had each other. And so, um, growing up in Chinatown, I felt that it was a really rich environment. One of the things that I remember is, my grandparents had businesses on Chungking Road. We would all help out here and there. It was pretty much typical of a lot of the immigrants in Chinatown at that time, and they worked hard, 24/7. They belonged to associations. This picture right here is of me on the left, and my cousins and some friends. And I think we were watching the students at Teen Posts, write posters. And so this was intriguing for us. Um, and I remember Teen Posts and the students used to help the younger students quite a bit with after school programs and activities. So it's kind of neat to see how it's all come back together. The demographics in the late 70s started to change in Chinatown as well. So there was an influx of Chinese and Vietnamese refugees. I saw, met a lot of friends who didn't speak English. They were struggling. A lot of them lived in one-bedroom apartments. And so I think this gives me a unique and diverse perspective and understanding of the struggles of immigrant life. And so I hope to bring this perspective to the Orange Unified School Board and in the community in Orange County.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andrea, there was a point in time where, either in college or shortly after college, you became a staff member at the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, which, was kind of like a fledgling organization about
Mhm.
that time. It was established, I think, in 1984.
Mhm.
And whatnot. So if you can, talk about how, basically like, going out of Chinatown and, and being in a Pan Asian Pacific American organization, how, that broadened your horizons and, led you to, what you're doing today with the school board.
I wish I could tell you that, I sought out the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, but it was almost accidental. I have a friend of a friend who said someone needed someone to work there, and so I said okay.
Mhm.
But I'm glad it happened, and I think sometimes things happen not just by chance. It just it it did help me to grow. It helped me to learn about the needs of our community. And so I was one of the first staff members to work there, and I watched it grow from a staff of like 4 or 5 people to 25 people by the time I left. And I moved to Orange County afterwards, got married and had
Mhm.
kids, and started my mom life before but even though I moved to Orange County, that notion of wanting to do something was always inside. We we feel like there's a calling, more of a like there's more important things to do, and you know being on the Orange Unified School District, I'm proud to say I'm the first Asian American elected to the school board, and our school district is over 60 something years old, and so that was quite a feat. And if the history of Orange County, it's not always easy to do.
Yeah.
And so right now, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm on the Asian Pacific Islander School Boards Association, and that's a nonprofit organization that is comprised of all school board members, and we're trying to push, the API stories and the ethnic studies model curriculum that is going through the state right now. We're working with Karen Korematsu, and we're really, the state had only identified 4 lesson plans, and so we did a push recently to try to get more lesson plans, different communities, and that's something we're working on right now as we speak. So, so those things are so important to me because our stories are need to be told by our perspective and need to be shared so we can have understanding and compassion and the and understanding the contributions of Asian Americans in general.
Yeah.
We've been here.
Mhm.
We've been here for 80 something years, and my husband served in the military, and I just feel like we are Americans, and we need to celebrate that.
Yeah, definitely. And stuff. I think that one of the things that I found very, very unique about Eddie and your segment, Andrea, was that in looking at Chungking Road in Chinatown, we were getting really into like very specific communities, almost like a place-based kind of a thing. Eddie, if I can turn it around to you, I know that when you were in film school and continuing to advance in that program, that your program was encouraging you to figuratively go off the reservation, um, and basically go to locations that held interest for you and what have you. And what you've chosen was to talk a little bit about like a project that you were involved in the Sacramento area. And if I'm wondering like if you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. Well, I did a lot of, I did a couple of film projects related to lock and photo projects. And actually that goes back to the time that I was actually working on Roots, an Asian American reader, which is like the first Asian American kind of textbook. And I was like TAing for Franklin Odo as a kind of a totally ignorant 19-year-old. But one of the topics we covered in Roots was this rural Chinatown called Locke, and it just totally fascinated me, and I'd always wanted to go there. And so when we were in ethno communications, there's a class called location photography, and for like 2 weeks you go on the road with your entire class, and everybody has a segment. And we did a segment on Chicano law students at UC Berkeley. We did a segment in like UC Santa Barbara with some other grouping of folks. But I chose Locke, and that's really the start of what became a film called Pieces of a Dream. It was really the contrast of great wealth on one side of town of Walnut Grove, which is the white side, and great poverty on the other side. And then basically this is native land that was reclaimed by Asian labor for white farmers and who reaped the wealth, from this. And so it's just a classic American horror story, and so that's what that whole experience was about, trying to, figure out different ways of telling that story.
Mhm. I see. Now, before you actually shot any film, you were actually doing photo documentation, and I had to really believe that the really earthy, tones of your black and white work really informed and actually provided a roadmap for you when you, basically came back with a motion picture camera shooting color.
Yeah, well, back in those days, we couldn't afford to shoot color film. It was just like, we shot 35 millimeter plus X, tri-X. Occasionally we shot color slides, but tri-X is just a beautiful format. I mean, it's like high grain. You could shoot in low light. You can push the stock tremendously. I mean, we were processing stuff at ASA 1200. So this might sound like a foreign language to people who are doing digital, but you could do, actually you could do that in digital now, just crank up the ASA. But we wanted that really gritty kind of look. That's what we learned on. So this we're looking at right now are the lock gardens. People thought, oh, wow, how quaint. These folks are like, gardening. And they didn't realize that they are gardening because this is a source of food. It wasn't like just exercise or fun. They were very impoverished. I mean, they had worked for years as farm laborers, and they had like no security net beyond their meager Social Security, and so they had to raise vegetables, to feed themselves.
Mhm.
So there.
I see. And then I think that one of the things that was very distinctive, about these shoots are basically like the people that you had met.
Yeah, well, this is Julian Panetta, who's a farm worker, Filipino, and I kind of lived in the Delta for a couple months, and that's how you do these projects. You have to sort of show up and wander around and meet people. And before I even shot anything, I just spent time hanging out with people. And I met Julian in a laundromat in Isleton, and we got to talking about stuff. And he was curious about why I was in the community, and he took me back to his apartment, his little shack actually in Walnut Grove, and we got to know each other a little bit. And then he took us to. He was still working. He was like over 70 at the time, and he was still harvesting grapes. And he said, "Why don't you come with me to the grape harvest in Lodi? That's where I'm going next." And I said, "Wow, this is great." And so I grabbed the whole crew, and we just went up to Lodi and followed them for a day to document this grape harvest. And like these gentlemen are in Locke, and there was a big family association celebration that day, so everyone was dressed up, and they were very gracious to allow me to photograph them. And in a lot of these cases, we kind of asked for permission by just sort of, I don't. Again, they speak a totally different dialect than even Toisan or Cantonese. They're from Cheongsam, which is where Sun Yat-sen is from. So they have a whole different dialect of Chinese. So we just had to sort of like, through gestures and in English, just, say, "Hey, is it okay for me to take your photograph?" And a lot of times if you ask, people will allow you to take their photographs. So I was very happy that they were presenting themselves as they wish to be seen. Okay, here's a photograph from that location photography class. It's Steve Tatsukawa, who's in our class and was one of the executive directors of visual communications. Great writer, legendary Gija person. Next to him is Rufus Howard, who was an African-American. He had come out of the service. I think he was in the Air Force. And, Ethno was like an affirmative action program. And so he had never thought about becoming a filmmaker, but he thought, hey, I want to, tell stories about my people. So he used his benefits to go to UCLA and join the Ethno program. That's me with the Eclair camera, and Larry Clark, who's a filmmaker, made some really astonishing work that's still studied today, and became a professor at SF State and many other colleges.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, that was our location class in Locke.
Wow, that's great. Now, Eddie, I'm gonna show in a couple of minutes like a wide variety of other photos, that were utilized, because part of you, Dwayne, and Bob's work in putting these documentaries together and what have you. And the more that I think about it, it's just amazing, that of the approximately 500 or 550,000 born on film images that currently exist in this archive, I think that you guys, may have easily gone through at least three-quarters, of that number in order to, to get to the number that you ultimately used for this, and and what have you. So I think that what I want to do is I want to have Marvin, just basically like very slowly go through the next several images and stuff, and I kind of like want to get you guys's thoughts, as we're taking a look at this whole range of Asian American experiences, whether or not they're, activists, or whether or not, their work, school, play, religion, what have you. We're really like seeing, the range of a community, coming together. And stuff. I wanted to just throw it out there for anybody to to start out. What are your thoughts about seeing people that a lot of people in the mainstream don't ever see if they don't like live east of La Cienega Boulevard, but which really constitutes a major portion of this very large community that we call Asian Pacific America. If anybody wants to take a crack at just commenting on on these images that we're going to be putting up next.
Why don't you show some of the images, and then people can react.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So, oh yeah, we'll see. Like we go from Koreatown to Manila Town, and then let's go ahead and go check out some more. Nick and whatnot. Ah, we're back in Chinatown.
Is that your cousin?
My little brother.
Oh, your little brother.
Yeah.
Oh wow, great. And then I believe that this is another cat who we've worked with. I believe his name is Van Troy Pang, and despite the looks, this is basically like on a movie set. That was part of a visual communications production. So basically, like these are one of the few images here that were actually in color. But as Eddie said, if we weren't shooting color film, we definitely were shooting slides. What have you, because production for us takes many forms, whether or not they're slideshows or whether or not they're multimedia presentations, in addition to films and and videos and and whatnot. So so yeah. So let's take a look at the next one here. So I believe that these were pictures from the I think the Pioneer Project, if I'm not mistaken, like the flower chips, and such. So I think that for this segment of of images, I believe that it was Robert Nakamura who was shooting in color, because I remember when he was capturing images of the of the poppies, that they were very, very vibrant. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one and stuff. And then back in Chinatown, the Alpine Rec Center and stuff.
Yeah, this is a women's basketball team that used to get together on Sunday mornings, and that's my sister Susie on the far left, and then Janet Lynn, and God, Mei Chen in the middle, and a whole bunch of Marie Chung. And as I heard from my sister, or from maybe it was from Anna G, who was part of that team, they were terrible. I mean, they were playing these younger junior kids who ran and ragged, but they had so much fun, you know? And so just wanted to capture that, which is one of those off the cuff, like, what are you doing Sunday morning? Well, we're going to play basketball. I said, oh, can I tag along? And just took the picture. So a lot of that was just, you know, we were kind of like that. We were just kind of like wandered around, didn't know quite exactly what we were shooting all the time.
Yeah.
But some of the other earlier photos were for storybooks. So Mrs. Kim at the Korean grocery store, or Mr. Silao. He was a minister and a machinist in a Long Beach shipyard. And I forgot how we found him, but he was part of a whole storybook series that we did. And all this was, you know, it was funded by foundation grants. And so, and this is from Omatai Fatase in the Wilmington, Long Beach area. And I think Takashi Fuji shot this. So they were all project related things. Even the Bob stuff with the Pioneer Project, that was eventually was part of a film called Watare Dori, Birds of Passage.
I see. Eddie, if you can talk a little bit about, you know, the photography practice at Visual Communications. You've told us stories that you know, many of the people at Visual Communications were learning how to make photographs, and Bob, Robert Nakamura, who was the you know, the commercial photographer, the one with the commercial photography, you know, background, it was, you know, was really like a very vital mentor, you know, in the process of, you know, of training, you know, our collective eyes to be like more astute in terms of what we have observed through the camera lens.
Yeah, well, Bob had, you know, been a Life magazine photographer. I mean, he had done freelance work for a lot of different people and a lot of commercial work. And he worked with Ray and Charles Eames, you know, really famous designers and and filmmakers. And so he had a certain standard, and he didn't like. He really imparted that, you know, you had to do the work. You can't just go around farting around. And so we spent a lot of time in the darkroom with him, learning how to make prints, you know, dodging and burning, and you know, all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, other people like Alan Hashi was really already quite skilled as a graphic designer, and so photography came very easily to him. And then Alan Kondo, who came in, had been a professional film editor when he joined VC. And so people had a certain amount of skills. I was probably the least skilled person of all of them. You know, I mean, I'm famous for my writing proposals, to be honest about it, which is kind of necessary. But yeah, I mean, we all learned from each other too. That was the other important thing. It was kind of a really unique moment. We were young, you know, the cost of living was cheap. We could afford to, like, you know, do all this stuff and go on unemployment when we needed to. You know, we made it happen for a while.
Well, that's great and stuff. I just wanted to add in a couple of images, you know, that were made a little bit more recently. And if we can go ahead and, you know, go through, you know, the three of them one by one. You know, one of the perceptions of our archive, you know, is that basically it's where photos, you know, basically go to die. And, you know, definitely that, you know, is not the case. I mentioned earlier that our archive is a working, living, breathing production resource from which many of our ideas and productions spring. And, you know, this image, you know, you know, of performance on the stage of the Japanese American, the Japan America Theater, Dengue Fever from back in 2004, I believe. And then the next one, which is basically a silent march through the streets of Little Tokyo in the wake of the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, you know, killing just earlier this year, you know, talks about the fact that, you know, a lot of things are happening in our communities more and more, you know, that, you know, Pan-Asian Pacific America becomes even broader, that, you know, that the, you know, the the need and the importance of documenting, our work, and ultimately, working to make them available and preserve them for future generations if we go to the next image. I think it's like important, and really an ever present challenge for us, and and what have you, and such. So if we can go back live, I wanted to just very quickly ask each of you, in taking a look at some of these things, and these photos that we've just seen, what have you, um, you know for each of you, how important is it, that these images, which perhaps at the time that they were made, may have been seen as like snapshots, but over time they take on a certain kind of historical resonance, and I think that that's the thing that I really enjoy from looking at and working with the resources in the archive, is that they ripen with age, right? And I wonder, in the in the work that that all of you do, whether or not your artistic practices and the products of that likewise gain a sense of resonance, particularly with your activities that each of you are participating in today.
I just make a comment on that. I have to kind of deviate somewhat, but I worked mainly on Ghidra, and Eddie worked on Ghidra as well as, but mostly on VC. But the two organizations, the two groups that started, were like sister organizations, and all of us were friends. But I guess people know that Ghidra published for 5 years, and then at that time we decided to sort of close down and move on. But visual communication had the foresight, or someone had the foresight, to sort of institutionalize and preserve all of the work that had been done. Fortunately for Ghidra, we were able to do that years later, because the newspapers are now digitized by Densho. But for us in Ghidra, we didn't think really that much about. We were pretty much in the moment, and weren't as conscious about what would people want to, like, would they want to see this 10 years from now or 20 years from now? Would they want to see it in 1980 or 1985? And really, saw our experiences validating itself. But I feel like, visual communications, I think the fact that you have this treasure trove, and also that we have a person like you, Abe, who's an institution in itself, to like curate and to talk about and to promote all of the still images that you have. Because I felt like in the later years there was much more emphasis on video and other forms of media, but and then making connections with people, Asian Americans struggling in Hollywood, or maybe not struggling anymore, but connections to major media. But I think the still photographs that you have really do, they really are important to the storytelling for the Asian Pacific American experience. So and you're Abe, you're doing a really good job, along with Francis and everybody else. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
try, I try
Yeah.
every day.
I think like Mary and I are more freelancers, and there are periods in my life where I didn't take pictures at all. But now that we went to digital, and the cost of film was another factor for like, we had to be very intentional about the pictures we took and the pictures that we printed. But now everybody has shitloads of what images all over, and it's but and sometimes we get some good images. But I think the fact that visual communications is so focused on, like capturing stories, I think is really good.
Mhm. In terms of capturing stories, I wanted to follow up with you, Mike, and for that matter, Mary, that the both of you I consider producers as well, because back in 1984 for the Little Tokyo Centennial that you had worked with Visual Communications, Mike, to produce a centennial book for the Little Tokyo Business Association, I guess. And then plus, Mary, you just recently came out with your own book in which you've chronicled this growth of Asian American community and movement through your own images, and what have you. And if I could turn it around, on the both of you, and ask you why does revisiting what seems to be old stuff, why is it still so important? Why is it valuable, for people today, as Linda Mabalit would call them, the young bloods, the whippersnappers, who are coming up? Why is it important for, all of those people to be able to, have that material on hand, exposed, to be able to mine and become inspired by?
A lot of people don't even know that there was an Asian American movement. I mean, I think if you've been with, around the Asian community somewhat, you may know something, but there's a whole lot of people who still don't know that it ever existed. And so when people do hear about it, it's just like, wow, right? And so I just want to follow up with Mike as far as Deidre. When I was working at UCLA, the publications coordinator, and there was this metal box that I always used to bump into. It was under my desk. And it took me about 5 years before I finally looked in it.
Mhm.
And then inside that metal box was all these original photos that were used in Ghidra layouts. And so that actually, became this very small movement archive that is housed at the Asian American Studies Center. But that archive alone, I mean, it's provided a lot of material that people are very interested in, right? And Ghidra at the time, I mean, they covered a lot of stuff that hasn't been covered anywhere else, right? And so, I mean, that alone, I think the historical importance of that is, it's huge, right? And then plus they had articles about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I forgot your question.
Well, no, I think that in terms of like, I'm sorry. Well, I'm talking a little bit about like the photographs that you work with in terms of your own projects and stuff, and how you come to recognize their importance for younger activistas and community members coming up who need to know this roadmap that's been paved and has been documented through images such as this. I'm kind of wondering about how you feel that your own contributions and your own creative activities have been important and stuff.
I haven't been able to interact with too many young people as far as having, them giving me feedback on the book that I put out. But I think the most rewarding thing is that a lot of people start recognizing who's who in these photographs. A lot of them I didn't know. And so like someone that I went out with when I was in junior high school, his wife's Bachan grandmother was in one of the wildflower pictures, right? And so those kind of things, I found out like the people on the cover, they're all people from Pasadena, which in those days, who thought of many activists coming from Pasadena, right? I didn't know me. And so it's finding out who these people are that's really kind of, it's like with Andrea and Eddie, right? it's like that community coming back together. And I think that's been the most gratifying thing in doing the book.
Mhm.
But I don't know as far as, you know, younger people, what they're getting out of it.
And Mike, your thoughts?
Well, I think not so personal, but I think the fact that Asian America, has continues to evolve, change, grow, become different. Um, that I think preserving even snapshots over a period of time, but more than that, things that tell stories, I think is really important because, each of us might have our own individual identity and identity search for identity, but I think the collective experience of, Asians, separately, Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, all of that too. But I think those experiences are really important because, like in the Japanese American community, some people who came here after World War II, and grew up here may say, well, I everybody, all people talk about is the camps, but I don't relate to the camps. And I have to go back and say, like individually, your family may not have had any camp experience in camp, but as a people, as a community, as others see us, we all went to camp.
Mhm.
And to so it's important for like even the recent immigrants to learn about the camp experience and the pre-war experience. And so in that way, I think, words alone don't do that. And I think images and footage really helps to do that.
Great. Andrea, as you mentioned, you're currently working to, bring up that next generation, of young folks as a school board member. And I wanted to ask you, in what ways, does encountering or recovering, this kind of history through photographs or other kinds of artistic practices or activities, help in your efforts to, to work to nurture a more, diverse, more socially justice-minded,
Mhm.
generation of people who are going to be coming, up after you.
Yeah. Well, I will say that, the last couple of years with the changes in politics and policies, I'm really happy to see a young generation, including my own kids, who are more politically aware um, than, the previous groups of students. And it takes something like this for kids to open up their eyes. And so I think, having a curriculum that is inclusive is going to be really important so they know that there are people who've been there too. And, these photographs are a reminder to me why it's important for Asians to get involved. It's important to support each other. We need to inform our community of their rights and their resources and even the importance of voting. I don't think that, there was a lot of apathy prior to this, last couple of election cycles. And so
Mhm.
I really think documentation is important because it's, helps us to celebrate the rich and diverse heritage and cultures of all of us. I mean, we're we're all different, but we're not not necessarily unique in our struggles.
Uh,
So I think it's so important to acknowledge the contributions of Asians, like I said earlier, because I think when kids don't see, their own faces in the history books and the textbooks, they don't feel like they're a part of America. Just through conversations with my own kids, they barely even remember reading about the internment camps. They weren't even aware of the 442, and so those are stories that we need to continue to tell and to push so that our kids know that there was a generation prior to them that did this and that they have a voice. So
Yeah.
I don't know
Great.
if I answered your question, but
Perfectly, that's perfectly fine. And such. Very quickly, there were a couple of questions that came in that I believe that they were answered already, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw them out there, so that the rest of the audience will be able to know what's been going on in the background. Ashley Lynn from New York City. Hi, Ashley. How you doing? She basically commented, these photos are very special. Thanks for shedding light. With the potential violence of taking a photograph, quote unquote, shooting, was there a practice of consent when taking photos during the birth of the Asian American movement? And Eddie, I believe that you may have partially answered that when you were talking about, your experiences in Locke. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what with those, we did street photography, and generally speaking, you don't ask for consent forms or releases. But when we made films and books, then we actually got signed releases from people.
I see. And then Robert Shoji from our Digital Histories class weighed in with a question. Hey, Robert, how you doing? He wanted to, ask a little bit about the Little Tokyo 100 Years in Pictures, book. And I think that, as a Digital Histories fellow, for the Visual Communications program, his documentary films have really been inspired by what he has found in that publication, because a lot of his more recent films in Digital Histories have really been inspired, by the images that were found, in that book. Michael, Mike, I just basically just wanted to get your thoughts, and again in terms of how a document that you helped make, basically a picture book back in 1984. It's almost like the gift that keeps on giving for a new generation of filmmakers and what have you. And I'm sure that must be really quite a legacy. That's it right there.
Yeah. As you said, it was commissioned by Little Tokyo Business Association. They gave us very little money. I worked on it for 11 months and collected photographs. I worked with VC. It was actually a commission to VC, and I worked for VC at the time. And what we were able to do, in addition to the VC archives, I went to talk to Toyo Miyatake, actually Archie, the son, the second generation Toyo Miyatake, the Rough Shimpo publisher Aki Komai, a lot of family, albums that I got access to, and collected something like 58,000 images to choose from. And I think I chose about 200 to tell the story. But I think, there again, like the pre-warriors, I mean, only professionals had cameras. And so you see very little, I mean, the quality of pre-war photos is just, really good. But I think we were able to put together, at least at the time, it was meant as a sort of a coffee table piece. There's some writing in it that I wrote, but I'm not a historian. I was just trying to give a sort of a flavor of what the pictures were like. But I'm glad that, even at that time, I thought it was going to just sell for the 84 centennial and then be gone. But I guess it's, I mean, I was proven wrong with Ghidra, and I was proven wrong with this too, that there has been a demand over the years. And, I think I'm happy to see that people still find some use in it. And I'm hoping that younger generations of people will not only refer to it, but add to it by, producing other books and other films and other different things too, because, you know, the story of Little Tokyo ends in 1984 in my book. There's a lot to be told since 84 to now.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Speaking of now, I wanted to go ahead and close this off by sharing a little bit about what you guys are doing now. And if I can go ahead and share a little bit about what you guys are doing. And I know that this is going to look like extortion pictures, but, just humor me a minute. So basically, Mike has been involved with a lot of activities. He's been involved with, the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations. He's been involved with, as I mentioned, the Little Tokyo Service Center and whatnot. And just recently, he led a group of people in building a recreation center, in Little Tokyo. It's basically the end of a nearly 2-decade mission. Mary, as we mentioned, was working at the UCLA Asian American Studies Center. And as I mentioned, she recently put out a book, that's being well received and what have you. So it's still, kind of rolling out, right now. I know that, putting it out in May in the middle of a pandemic is like, wow, that's just bad timing. But it's been really surprising, at the reception that it's been receiving so far, and I think that that's fantastic. As I mentioned, Andrea, because a member of the board of the Orange Unified School District, and doing a lot of really wonderful work in helping to nurture that next generation of folks. And Eddie, well, Eddie's been, up to his old bag of tricks, among other things, besides, doing the exhibit and what have you. He basically resurrected a publication that he was involved in the 80s called East Wind. It is now online and it exists as a very content-rich a web destination, what have you. In taking a look at what all of you are doing today, and just basically like seeing as how, these are largely like, not ancient pictures, but, photos that, have, been posted on social media. Oh my gosh, only within the last year to 18 months. This is very, very recently and what have you. I'd like to invite, your final thoughts in terms of, how, photos, can tell us, so much about our lives and our experiences, both activists and as, people, participating in this American experience and, what have you, and really where we need to, go to kind of like push it, as it were, if anybody wants to, take a stab at that.
Well, maybe I'll start. That last picture of me is with my daughter, Maggie, who's Hapa. Her mom, my wife, Anna Whittington, was from Mississippi. So we had a very different kind of experience growing up. And now she's teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and really getting into anti-racist curriculum work with her students. I think that we're just living in this really strange moment where, as everyone knows, we're fearful of our lives, uncertain of our future, and wow, what a great time to make movies, right? But there is a kernel of truth to that, and that is people are still struggling. And so with East Wind Easing, I try to make it a platform for people. So like a young filmmaker in Chinatown, Brian Shee, did a piece on the 920 Everett Street apartment building eviction struggle. So that's a really important story to tell. And I'm also trying to recover a lot of history of Asian Americans who were in the civil rights movement. And I was really fortunate to meet some people who still have those stories and can share them. And we'll be doing a webinar on Friday at 11 a.m. with UCLA with some of those veterans. So I think that there's a lot of storytelling to be told because there's a lot of trauma going on. And so, we've seen the footage of Asians being assaulted by racists and people who are just batshit crazy, fearful, etc. But I'm waiting to see the cell phone footage from the point of view of the people who are living through this experience. And I think we'll see that. And I think programs that VC has, like Armed with a Camera and Digital Histories, provide a vehicle for some of that. So I'm looking forward to more stories. Actually, it never ends. It's an ongoing story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mike and Andrea, particularly, through the Budokan, the activity center and your work with the school board and what have you, you really are working with the next generation of folks and, what have you. I'm just kind of curious. Andrea, you had mentioned, already, but Mike, if you haven't, addressed it, developments like this, what it'll do, like for that next generation, in terms of both, social and even artistic, or even a place, to make, art or activity and what have you. What do you think is going to be that legacy?
Are you speaking about the Budokan itself, or?
Yeah, yeah, and and now that it is finished, you can step back and take a look at it and stuff. What does it really mean?
Well, I think all along, the idea was to build a facility. It's basically a sports and recreation center within Little Tokyo, and I think the idea was, number one, to bring JA kids, and like basketball is a very popular sport in the JA community. So, and what we call the JA leagues are more than JA. There's a lot of Asians, Hapas. I mean, everybody plays in them, but to bring them back to Little Tokyo, to identify with, and to create memories from themselves, because a lot of us that grew up, Sansei, like grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we have good memories of the communities that we grew up in. And I'm sure that's true for Andrea in Chinatown. And I think, as Asian populations have dispersed geographically, I think we want to create a way of creating their own memories that's attached to an ethnic identity. And the second thing is to really, do our part to ensure that Little Tokyo as a community continues to exist in the future, because, as you know, it's been threatened many times over, and so far been resilient enough to continue as a community that's the center for Japanese Americans. So I think those experiences are important. I didn't see it so much related to arts and such, but I think, I mean, arts and, preservation of images, I think those are all, with the same intent.
Yeah.
Of, and I feel like for young people, even the snippets of like just memories, things, vignettes that they remember in their heads. They don't have to know the whole history of, what happened with who and all of that, but just create their own experiences.
Mm-hmm. And Mary, I'll go ahead and give you the last word. Your book has just come out only like 5-6 months ago, and what have you, and it's just really starting to gain traction. What are your hopes for your book in terms of what you hope that people who encounter it and learn from it and experience it will come away with?
Okay, one of my last chapters, I want to show the picture. I don't know if you can see it, but if you go to New York City,
Mm-hmm.
the tallest high-rise building in New York, Chinatown in Manhattan, is Confucius Plaza. And to see that building and then to know the history behind it, I think is really important. And that history was really the struggle of the Chinatown community and Chinese American construction workers working with Black and Puerto Rican construction workers, and basically struggling to get jobs at this work site that was federally funded. And they were not going to hire any of the local Chinese from the neighborhood to work on this building in their community. And so struggles like that, I think this is really the future that we have to look at. It is Asians and Black and brown and whites working together. And these moments, they're not they're not documented enough. You know, they've happened over time, over history. There's a whole history of these interactions, but they're not out there. And this is something that we really have to build on.
Yeah.
So that I think is the most important thing I would like to, promote.
Yeah. And Andrea, any last words?
Well, I just wanted to say it's interesting that Mike mentioned, the community events. My kids did play basketball, and it was through that they were able to actually get a little bit of their history and culture back, because they participated in Abon festivals and Mochizuki, and now they understand, that this was a part of their history. So we need to provide our kids with more opportunities to participate in events like that, so they understand. And the last thing I just want to say, it is so important for us to understand the changing demographics and dynamics of the API community. I mean, it's different in all areas, and we need to dispel the model minority myth, because not all Asians are doing as well as they're perceived sometimes. And so those are challenges that we have to face in our own communities. We have kids who are struggling as well. And so,
Great.
we have unique challenges. And so it's important for us to continue telling our stories.
Great.
And they
Great.
can see faces represented that look like their own.
All right. Well, anyway, I want to thank each of you for joining us this afternoon. I see most of you all the time, and it's really a drag that that we can't do this in person. But you know what? We will be able to get together again one day very, very soon. So I want to thank each of you for your participation and your hard work. Just as a last commercial, I did want to mention that at the beginning, I did mention that Visual Communications was in the middle of its 50th anniversary year. Not many organizations get to 50, and so for us to to get there, I think is like a very monumental, occasion. On December 1st, we're going to be, doing a virtual gala that's inspired by, our previous Pass Forward, galas and what have you. So we invite you to come check that out. That's Tuesday, December 1st. That's going to be the, I believe it's going to be the Tuesday following Thanksgiving weekend. So, we, really encourage you to check that out. We will be doing a few other programs, into the new year as we turn 51. In April of 2021, but that's basically to say that even though we're doing this event, there's plenty of anniversary stuff that we still are going to be doing. So we want to make sure that you hang out with us and join us for what has already been a very memorable and very, very special year. So again, Eddie, Mike, Andrea, Mary, I want to thank all of you as we close out. I want to thank all of you for joining us and sharing your stories, and sharing your experiences. All of your stories really give the Visual Communications' photographic archive this added dimension, for your participation and your presence in them. So, again, thank you so very much. And everybody, thank you once again. If you need to find out a little bit anything about us, it's very simple. It's vcmedia.org. Get on our mail list, check us out. We have a weekly e-letter, that's coming out. And as all of these folks are also on social media. As Eddie mentioned, there are many important activities that are, coming up, that are very important to our communities and what have you. So we really encourage you, to check all of that out. So again, you guys, thank you so very much. And thank you everybody out there for joining us on a Monday evening. You guys have a safe Monday. Stay safe, mask up.
Thank
We
you.
don't want to talk about anybody in the past tense. We don't want to do that. So again, thank you, everybody, and you have a pleasant evening.